sights he'd seen. It was as though I'd reached the gates of hell. It won't be long before we're all there. He shuddered. I touched his forehead, expecting a high fever with this ranting, but he was only warm, not burning up. I frowned, wondering how much of his rambling was true. "Can I write a letter to my mother?" he asked plaintively. I wish I could sit in her lap and hug her as I used to one last time. He was crying now, pitiful as a child. "Shh," I said, smoothing the hair from his brow. "I'll help you write your letter after you sleep. You'll see your mother soon when you get home. You won't be going back to the front." He nodded, sighing deeply as he closed his eyes. The medication was setting in. I checked his file. He was only 15, and yet he'd seen more than most people had in a lifetime. Generations of men were being wiped out, thousands dying in each new battle. I began to pay closer attention to the youngest members of our strange community, the Flag Helpers. I was surprised to find that Ida's granddaughter, Mina, was here. She was only 13. "How long have you been here?" I asked, as she hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "4 weeks," she murmured. "It's so good to see someone from home. I've missed everyone." I kissed the top of her dark head, my heart clutching at the cruelty of taking children away from their families and into the face of danger. Mina explained about her work and introduced me to her new friends at the Zoo Tower, as it was affectionately known. There were boys from the Hitler Youth and girls from the BDM, probably much the same age as my young patient, I thought. But once I began chatting to them, I discovered some were as young as 12 years old. I was appalled that children so young were being made to handle and move munitions, helping man the anti-aircraft guns, and learning how to operate them. None of them seemed terribly worried, because we'd seen a few air raids in the past months, but I wasn't sure how long that would last. I began bringing fruit and biscuits to them every now and then. Many told stories of older brothers on the front line. Some had sad stories of fathers and brothers who had already perished, and mothers who were barely able to put food on the table. To them, the Flag Tower seemed like a much better place. Here they had warm blankets and full stomachs, and the camaraderie of their units. But I remembered what the city had been like a year earlier, when much of Berlin had been battered by the bombings. I kept an eye on Mina. The next day, Tante Elia called me home. They'd received a letter from Leo. Leo is kind "He's all right," I murmured, but none of us touched our tea, the steaming cups of yellow liquid cooling quickly on the coffee table. Because of our contacts, I've been accepted by the resistance here. It's a very strong group, a mix of political and non-political prisoners, not just communists, and from a range of countries and backgrounds. We're preparing for Germany's defeat, smuggling weapons into the camp and organizing sabotage in the munitions factories. When our overlords become preoccupied with the advancing armies of the Americans or Russians, who knows who will arrive first, and then their own survival will hit back. There's no stopping him, Uncle George, his eyes shining with pride. Robert Seward is a very important man in the leadership of the resistance, and uses his position as capo here to help as many of us as he can. He's been teaching the children bricklaying so they have useful skills, and helps to hide any prisoners at risk and gives them new identities. After the execution of Ernst Thälmann last year in the speech he gave at his memorial, he's being watched by the camp administration and has to be careful what he does. "Who's Ernst Thälmann?" I asked. He was the leader of the Communist Party of Germany and a candidate for the presidency against von Hindenburg and Hitler in 1932, before the Nazis took power, and he was arrested, said Uncle George, looking up from Leo's letter. I nodded, understanding why he had been murdered. He would have been a rallying point of opposition to the Third Reich, a threat the Nazis could not afford as Germany drew closer to defeat. Sadness washed over me as I wondered how many good people would be left by the end of this war, and how many more the Nazis would murder before they were toppled from power. But he's been good to me, and has made sure I've been placed in a good Labour detachment, not in the quarry attached to Buchenwald itself. I'm now at the Ohrdruf work camp, about 60 kilometres away. Ohrdruf was created a couple of months ago, and already there are thousands working here. We spend our days digging tunnels, removing rock and rubble, building roads and a railway line. It's hard to tell what we're working towards, but there's talk of secret underground headquarters and a communication centre for the government. SS guards from Auschwitz have joined our own guards here, and that makes me believe that the rumours are true. The days are long, 14 hours. I'm used to was the same for all of us. On a visit to the village, I told Ida that I was looking after Mina as best I could. Berlin was in lockdown. The city centre had been bombed by the Allies, and now fires raged, destroying whatever the bombs hadn't. Cultural icons. And many of the government buildings, including the Reich Chancellery, had been damaged, but still the borough remained unscathed. Government offices were already closed and relocated to remote and often secret locations, just like the government to run away, I thought, but work continued, the same as ever at the Zoo Tower. Like other hospitals, we were on standby, ready to accept staff and patients of evacuated hospitals closer to the Allied and Russian lines. Whenever we weren't looking after patients, we were conducting a stocktake of our supplies and finding ways to make what we had last as long as possible. Preparations were made to bring in experienced medical staff and resources into the more fortified positions, places where we could protect our patients, and I would be able to take the injured once Berlin was under siege. I was overjoyed to learn that Joanne and Marika, who'd returned to the Belize hospital after she was married, were being transferred to the Zoo Tower. I was excited to see them both and be working with them again. I can't believe you're here, I said, hugging Marika tight in the middle of the hospital corridor door. She looked radiant even in her nurse's uniform. Married life treating you well? She nodded. We're so happy. We have a little house in Kreuzberg now that we've been transferred. Johann's been promoted to surgical registrar, so now he can begin his training to become a surgeon. Well, he'll learn quickly here, I said. The injured are arriving much sooner now that the front line's getting closer. I can't believe it's taken the Soviets so long to cross the Vistula River, she whispered. They've been outside Warsaw for months. I pulled her into an empty room. I know. A sense of foreboding had been growing within me as I'd been hearing reports of always wavering. I'd rather go to prison than spend another day up on the platform waiting for enemy aircraft. When they come, we work as fast as we can to fetch the ammunition, but I'm so scared. All we can hear is the guns, hoping we hit them, but what we really do is to keep them from flying too low. Then there's the explosion of bombs falling across the city, and we're always waiting for a bomb to fall on us. She burst into tears, and Mina put her arms around her, comforting her as best she could. I just want to hug my mother before I die and tell my little brother to be a good boy and look after her. Rita dashed the tears away angrily. But I don't think I'll ever get the chance. I have no home, whispered another young girl, still holding her chocolate. Our apartment block was bombed, and my mother and brother have left the city. I don't know where they've gone. We haven't been granted leave for weeks. None of us can be spared now. We're the only ones defending our city, said a tall lanky girl, but nobody sees us shaking so hard we can't hold a machine guns. Frida's words punctured through the tough facade of these young soldiers, and they were now voicing their true feelings. It's when we're in bed, when nobody's watching, that so many of us cry. Some want to go home so badly, they're ready to desert. America and I looked at each other, speechless. Then a loud boom reverberated through the dormitory, and a number of girls screamed, quivering. Mama, cried a young girl with large blue eyes, chocolate smeared across her mouth. I want my mama. The others moved quickly to her, hugging her and whispering soft, soft words. It's alright, Emily, said Mina. You're safe here. Come, I said, gently steering the girl towards the bathroom. Let's get you cleaned up. Well, that's where I'm gonna stop reading the book for tonight. That was a bit of an intense passage. What do you think? I think when I read things like this, it really gives me some perspective and puts me in the shoes of people who live